move fast and take risk. And this is an interesting point. I think in most of the companies, progress is often hindered by indecision and a fear of failure, right? So we try to give an environment where people can embrace experimentation, testing, and calculated risk taking, and making sure that people are unafraid to explore the unknown, learn from failures, and push the boundaries of what's possible. So this is kind of what it means to move fast and take risks. So literally, it's a safe environment where you can break things, fail safely without getting penalized for it.
Welcome to the People Powered Solutions podcast. In this show, you'll gain expert advice and tips on building a thriving workplace culture with happy employees. I'm your host, Lorianne Duguay, and I'm thrilled to be spending this time with you today. Hello, and welcome to another episode of the People Powered podcast. We are continuing our series, our secret sauce series, where we showcase companies that are already doing great and innovative things when it comes to managing their people and when it comes to the culture, the environment they're creating for their most valuable resource, their internal employees, their team members. Today, we welcome Arshad Hisham from inGen Dynamics. And inGen, from what I've seen, are doing some really progressive things when it comes to setting their people up for success, when it comes to helping their people understand the purpose, the impact this company is having on the world. So welcome, Arshad.
Thank you, Lori. Thank you very much for having me on the show, and a really exciting stuff that you're doing with your company. So really look forward to that, and thank you for your kind words.
We're excited to have you as well. Before we deep dive into kind of details or sneak peeks, secret sauce recipes of how to set your people up for success, I'd like for you to just give our listeners a bit of insight, a bit of context of how Arshad got to doing what Arshad does today, as well as if you could give us a bit more information about what inGen Dynamics is and what it hopes to achieve in the world in general. So let's
Sure.
I'll leave you kind of provide that insight.
Sure. Thank you, Lori. I'm a big science fiction fan, so that's a disclaimer I would put, before answering that question.
Before answering any questions, he needs
Any
to put
question,
that out.
right?
Got
So I
it.
think you can draw parallels to a lot of, especially Asimov, Battlestar Galactica, and the whole nine yards, right? I watched a lot of the recent movies, I've watched a lot of the recent series, and I think as a child growing up, I've been fascinated by the Foundation series from Asimov. I actually read it when I was 11 years old. It was pretty early to deep dive into Foundation series, right? And one of the things I wanted to do very early on, it really fascinated me. So when I grew up, I wanted to bring a lot of these ideas in science fiction to life, right? So this is what kind of drove me to become an engineer, to get into robotics very early on. And when I graduated, the real world hit. You need to pay the bills. You need to kind of get the things going. So it was not an option to experiment. So I started a tech career, post engineering. Worked with a lot of companies worldwide, including Government of Australia, and spent a lot of time in the corporate world. Did an MBA. Then I started a series of companies. I'm on my fifth company.
Wow.
And a lot of the companies that I've done previously have increased in product complexity. So I think, we did enterprise SaaS startup, point of sale solution, and ending up with my current robotics and AI, which is what I wanted to do, to be honest. But
From the get-go, but you had to get through all these 4 other companies
Exactly.
to pay the bills so that you could also grow the experience.
Exactly. And the first couple of companies were learning experiences in terms of you learn about recruiting, learn about managing people. And as a leader, I think it's something that you realize that every new experience humbles you, right? You kind of you kind of understand that what you don't know is actually much bigger, and most people are not aware. what you don't know very early on. So it kind of humbles
Hmm.
you as you run companies. So at inGen Dynamics, the goal of our company is to improve quality of life for humans, include with affordable, intuitive, and practical AI automation robotics. I know it's quite a mouthful, but those are very carefully chosen words, phrases, and qualifiers, right? I mean, and every product that we create improves quality of life. We Our products stand apart because they are practical, intuitive, and affordable.
And
And these
affordable, yeah.
are yeah, these are things that you don't normally associate with robotics and AI. So I think
No, you're
that's why
right.
it's important, right? We qualify that properly. So this is kind of thesis, or in a nutshell, what we do. And we have several line of products coming out. At the core, we are a research and development company, and we have churned out several products 8 years since inception. Like many companies doing R&D, we're no different. I think we've run to several iterations of the product, and it's been a fascinating journey so far. And yeah, so I guess that's it, Lori. I want to make the
Hey,
answer short.
I think that is fascinating, and it's super helpful for the audience to understand that you've known corporate, you've worked in corporate, you've went kind of that. I would say that a lot of engineers will take a similar or parallel path of, completing their engineering, working in corporate, then completing an MBA, and then getting to a point where they're wondering, what now? What next? I love that you were able to always kind of harness that initial, what was it, 12 years old, 8 years old, that you mentioned, where you wanted to make science fiction and bring science fiction to the real world, to life. And you've effectively been able to do that with InGen Dynamics. Also love that you've mentioned it wasn't a one and done. It wasn't you came out of engineering school and that's you started InGen Dynamics. Reality happened, life happened, you had bills to pay, you couldn't afford necessarily to take the risks that might be associated with deep diving into AI and robotics right away, because we know that it is an extremely costly research and development kind of industry. So that being said, you were able to start these other companies, use those as learning opportunities, accumulate all of that experience and all of that now newfound knowledge, expertise, and inject it, infuse it into InGen Dynamics, which, number one, I think is probably one of the reasons that you've seen so much success with the company, because you had all of that foundation built, not necessarily within this company, but having built it over time with all of these other companies. So thank you for providing that additional insight. So 8 years since inception, it is an AI robotics company, research and development company that also partners and actually produces products, which at the end of the day strive to make life easier for humans. That's no small mission, if I may say so myself. It's a pretty lofty mission, but one that you have already achieved on more than one occasion. So, great insight, great context. Now let's segue into what I love to talk about, of course, the culture at InGen Dynamics. So to give our listeners a bit of an idea, I believe when we initially spoke, you talked about having 100 employees globally?
That's right. That's
Okay.
right.
And not all of them work in fixed locations altogether, correct?
That's right. So we have, just to add to that point, we have consultants, hybrid employees, contractors, full-time employees, the whole gamut, right? So we do have a lot of people thrown in the mix post-pandemic. Yeah.
Okay. And you have already in 8 years achieved some pretty impressive growth. And from what our initial conversation, listeners, I always have a bit of a fit check with my prospective guests prior to the actual recording, where we are able to kind of exchange and explore a bit of synergies and see whether or not, they'd be a great fit. And whether in fact they do have a secret sauce recipe that I feel is valuable and should be shared with our audience. And then we segue here. So when I'm referencing those other conversations, that's kind of what I'm referring to. But during that conversation, you talked a lot about kind of that expected growth as well. And just in general, how you don't generally have to spend a lot of time on recruitment. What you have seen is kind of this organic recruitment occurring where people just come to you and apply to you. So my first question is, why do you think, what is it about inGen Dynamics that makes people want to apply?
Sure. I think one of my pet peeves, or to use a bit more strong language, one of the things I hated when I was working in a corporate company, in a corporate environment, is a corporate bloat, as they call it, right? So I think,
Corporate bloat, I love it.
yeah. And when I was working, I don't want to name companies. when I was
Absolutely not.
working when I was working in some of those companies, you kind of feel the weight of bureaucracy, the processes, and 70-80% of them were unproductive, right? And I was like so eager, and I wanted things yesterday. And I've actually did well in all these companies. Despite that, I was rated very highly on the performance reviews. But this is something that kind of, I wanted everything done yesterday, and it was not a conducive environment, to do
So
this.
the
And
corporate bloat, all of that kind of bureaucracy prevented you from really being able to achieve the
absolutely,
results that you were striving for.
absolutely.
Okay.
And the other thing I've noticed, and this is more in my startups, right? When I started doing my startups, one of the things that I've noticed, especially with the executive team, is that sometimes the mission, vision of the company is not aligned with the agenda of the executives, right? And I think this is kind of detrimental, right? I mean, if the objective of the founder, since I'm the founder, my objective is to maximize the company's mission, vision, so it's just something that I've noticed. This is not from a corporate environment, this is from startups. And that's why, we have zero tolerance for corporate politics. So, and that means that we have a transparent and collaborative culture that values teamwork, innovation, and excellence over, what you can say, personal agenda or political gamesmanship. Again, very loaded words, but you get what I'm saying, right?
Very loaded words, but I absolutely get. So what I'm hearing is you think kind of one of that allure to an external person who suddenly realizes that if you work at inGen Dynamics, they are anti-corporate bloat. And I'm pretty sure it is on your website under some of your values, if I'm not mistaken.
Absolutely.
Right? Yes. So
Absolutely.
I'm looking for a job. I end up on the website. I see that there's zero corporate bloat right there. I am intrigued because let's be honest, everybody says they don't want it. Then if that's the case, not enough companies spend time at eliminating it. And it sounds like you have effectively eliminated it within inGen Dynamics. And so when we hear corporate bloat, for those who may not be familiar with the term, we're talking about the office politics. Absolutely. What other things fall under corporate bloat as far as you're concerned, Arshad?
I think it's just a process, right? I mean, we had this instance where somebody was testing a new idea, right? So he needs to run it through a couple of documentation, send an email, get an approval, and by the time the whole thing is done, the idea is obsolete. It's a classic
Ah,
example, right? The idea is
okay.
obsolete. So I think we are in a very fast-paced environment where we don't. I mean, we need some processes. This doesn't mean, to be fair, that we get rid of all the processes. It's just the
Mhm.
balance, right?
I
What's
agree.
the right What's the right balance? So again, don't get me wrong. This is not like you go and do whatever you want and then check
No,
out of the
no.
office.
But what you're saying is about being very intentional at which levels of approval, which levels of,
Absolutely,
kind of authority an idea needs to
absolutely,
go through. Is it
and
required, or is it just because we've always done it that way, and
absolutely,
to
and I
take the
think
time to eliminate them?
yeah, and I think it's an iterative process. I think it will tend to, as a company grows, as the products mature, it also has a relation to the maturity of your product. Like if your product is in early stages, the ratio tends to tip on the other side. But once it matures and gets into production, then it slightly tips to the other side, right? I mean,
Okay.
that's logical.
So which sides are we talking about, just to be clear? In the kind of inception phases, more
Inception.
levels is not a bad thing because it might create, make sure that we catch any costly mistakes at the kind of forefront.
Absolutely,
But the more it
absolutely.
matures, the less approvals should be required.
Absolutely, and again, that's how I think we have seen, and and there is no fixed rule, but generally, the people working on it know intuitively that if they're doing too much paperwork,
Mhm.
right? This is kind of they know. I mean, if they
They
spend,
know. So corporate bloat is unnecessary paperwork, folks. It is unnecessary meetings. It is office politics. It is adding a bunch of approval steps that aren't necessary. It is doing things the way they've always been done. All of that can be used to define corporate bloat. At inGen Dynamics, from what we're hearing, they have been very proactive at eliminating that corporate bloat. They have a zero tolerance for it. Therefore, they make sure that it's not there. Right there, if you think about the last job that you were completely unhappy at, the last job that you had checked out of, what are the odds that corporate bloat and any variation of the latter factored into that feeling? I would gander it's close to 90% the case. So, right away, kind of this quick tip. First ingredient in that secret sauce, folks, is to eliminate. Take time to identify what kind of processes are unnecessary. What kind of hoops are we making our people jump through? What kind of meetings are we having that are not necessary? And start by eliminating those to reduce the corporate bloat as a means of not only attracting that next generation of workers, but also as a means of keeping your existing ones who are extremely valuable, happy, engaged, and staying with you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for that first kind of tip. So we talked about what kind of things attract that next generation of workers to inGen Dynamics. Why is it that you barely have to spend any money on recruitment because they come to you? You talked about because you have a zero tolerance of corporate bloat. I also heard a bit about purpose and impact. Really kind of through some of your examples, I was able to surmise that purpose and impact, you realize that you're doing a great thing. You have a mission, a vision as an organization, and you think it's extremely important to get everybody aligned with that bigger picture, with that corporate, that collective vision, that collective mission, as opposed to people having, a focus and injecting their energy in the achievement of individual results. Is that what I heard?
absolutely, and I think and that's one of our pillars. We call this a five pillars at inGen Dynamics. So this is our one of the pillars, and we call it mission driven with a product first mindset, to be specific, right? And the reason I would like to elaborate is that our focus is on delivering secure high quality products while avoiding distractions and unrelated tasks. And that's a very easy thing to write in a sentence, but if you take any complex R&D, any complex product development, it's actually very hard to figure out what is a distraction and what's an unrelated task, right?
Hmm.
It's actually
Mhm.
very hard. So that's where if you have a mission driven mindset and a product first mindset, I think it really comes to the fore. And it's a shared commitment. Our builders, designers, and engineers share this point. And I think it's very important because at the end of the day, people understand they're making an impact. And I think we have been fortunate enough to have an impact. We've been featured on a lot of academia, close to 30 uh, papers, a lot of press. So when you have a product that makes an impact and you're kind of creating history along the way, that's a fantastic motivation for people to, to do what you're doing, to double check and
Absolutely.
ask. And as Steve Jobs once said, on the Apple computers, even inside the computer, it's finished well because it's not about appearances. It's just how you do it, right?
Mhm.
So to
Mhm.
people to have that drive, I think it's very important. You be mission driven with a product first mindset.
I love it. Mission driven with a product first mindset, understanding that, you do it right, not for the perception that you do things right. You do it right because that's just how you do things. Anything
Absolutely.
outside of that is unacceptable. And being able to convey that and communicate that regularly to your team members will enlist them into that broader vision. Being able to, you talked about when you are able to kind of create that history of a product from inception through to when it's actually produced and it comes to be, and then showcasing that entire journey to say all of these different people had a hand in making this product a realization, and all of those people were needed, and then communicating that to team members so that the next time you get another project, another pitch, and you sign a new contract with a client and you need to develop something again, they're that much more invested in the process because they want to be a part of what they just witnessed in that former project, right? So being able to kind of not only showcase those success stories, but leveraging those success stories in order to nurture that seed of loyalty and to nurture kind of that engagement from your team members to get them on board and performing at the level and standard that you expect on that next project. You talked about 5 pillars. Now I'm curious. So would you like to share with our audience those 5 pillars?
Absolutely. I think we covered two of them: zero corporate bloat, and the mission driven with the product first mindset.
So,
And
okay.
and the other three to kind of in no priority
Yeah,
is
yeah.
is is zero tolerance for corporate politics. And this is again interesting thing I've seen in a lot of startups is, and this is basic human nature, because we tend to accumulate power and control, right? Once you
Mm.
get into a role, this is basic human nature. So we need to make sure that people are not incentivized to accumulate power and control, but rather they're incentivized to further the mission vision of the company, right? So that's it in a nutshell. And this is what we call a zero tolerance for office politics. So this means we are transparent and collaborative, values teamwork, innovation, and excellence over personal agendas or political gamesmanship, right? So this is kind of one of the other pillars, right? And do you want me to jump into the next two?
I want us to continue. I'm loving these. Zero corporate bloat, mission driven with a product first mindset, zero tolerance for office politics. Right now, I'm already 100% ready to click the apply now button, but let's just go through those last two to land that
Sure,
actual click.
sure. And I think the fourth one is move fast and take risk. And this is an interesting point. I think in most of the companies, progress is often hindered by indecision and a fear of failure,
Hmm.
right? So we try to give an environment where people can embrace experimentation, testing, and calculated risk taking, and making sure that people are unafraid to explore the unknown, learn from failures, and push the boundaries of what's possible. So this is kind of what it means to move fast and take risks. So literally, it's a safe environment where you can break things, safely without getting
So
penalized for it.
I like that. I like that. And it also speaks to psychological safety to some extent. So I think for the benefit of our listeners, do you have very specific examples of where, you know, or how or practices that you've implemented that continue to reinforce that move fast, take risks, and fail is okay?
Absolutely. And I'll give you a classic example, right? So we have an R&D loop where people create PCB boards for the robots. And what tends to happen is that some of these boards are expensive. So when
Okay.
they experiment, they burn out. It's actually sunk cost, right? And in other companies, what I've seen is that people don't report when something burns out. And it actually ends up costing the company 20x more because you catch this only later on. So this is a very classic example. So if you
It
have
is.
such an environment, you can actually save more money if you're willing to, let people lose and fail. Right? This is a classic example. So we have saved a lot of money because people come forward and say that it's failed because we know that they know we are not going to penalize them. So
Mhm.
this is a good example too.
And I think it's a great example because I have actually worked with clients who work in robotics industry, and we had to build an entire kind of training path to help normalize failure so that people could develop the level of trust and vulnerability required to admit when something has gone array, when something is not working, before it gets too far into the development, because it's again similar to your industry, I imagine, where you've got your apps people who initially start, perhaps who build it up, and then your designers, whatever order that may be, but you've got like three different kinds of engineers working on a product at different times. But if something failed in that initial phase and it was glossed over or not mentioned, that mistake is going to follow out throughout all of these other phases and end with a subpar product that's going to have a lot of costly issues. So if you're able to spend a bit of time in normalizing failure and saying that we accept it and would prefer to know before it's too far gone, then people will be that much more apt to kind of fess up and say, hey, tried this, it didn't work. Sorry, it might have cost something, but in the long run, you're saving money, because if you're not creating that environment, then it will quickly add up in terms of having to rework and fix and troubleshoot any issues that will come out down the line, because suddenly you've got three other levels that need to be corrected rather than being corrected at the onset of where the initial fail happened, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think this is something that most companies don't realize inherently, or too late in the process. So I think, and I think it's really made a difference.
So another ingredient in that secret sauce, I mean, those 5 pillars, let's be honest, they are the recipe, as far as I'm concerned, of inGen Dynamics success when it comes to their people and just in general. But another secret ingredient is to normalize and make sure that people are okay with taking risks, and that you understand that failure is simply a reason to learn and grow and evolve. And failure, in fact, will drive innovation at the end of the day. And being able to embrace that as an organization and being able to communicate and help your team members really understand and embody that they're okay with failure can be game changing when it comes to not only the engagement level of your people, but just your overall productivity and success as a company in terms of being able to preempt and mitigate financial losses down the road from a culture that hides mistakes, that hides failures, and the ripple effect that causes on the product itself and the quality of the service. Okay, we're down. We've got 4 pillars down. What's our 5th pillar?
The 5th pillar is that we are progressively optimistic, right? And again, very carefully chosen pair of words,
Yeah,
right?
I was going to say that's an interesting combination of words.
Sure. And I think it kind of means that we are optimistic. And if you see our tagline, our main thing is that building a better future. So we are about creating a brighter future, right? And we are optimistic in the way that we kind of progress in our vision and whatever we do. So I think this is what defines us in a lot of the work we do, because I think it's very hard what we're doing. Pretty much the scale, as you mentioned early on in the talk, when we are literally humbled by the scale of our undertaking, and we're going to have some formidable obstacles, right? So it's essential that we maintain an optimistic outlook, because otherwise people are going to burn out. And that's why this is not just a regular job. If you don't really believe that you can make a difference, you're going to burn out, because your heart needs to be in it. You need to be passionate. You really need to believe what you're doing, right? Because it's very hard what we're doing. And a lot of people have said this, that none of the employees, people who worked at inGen, has ever complained that the work is boring or they didn't enjoy the time here. It's more like a boot camp. And a lot of our people have gone on to have great careers, and we have a great alumni network who all kind of, and a lot of people are reapplying to come back. And I think part of that is this 5 pillars, and specifically, the progressively optimistic pillar.
I agree. And I think that the fact that you've undersold yourself right there, where you said it might be I would say that those 5 pillars, the culture you've created, is 100% the reason why people come back and apply. When we initially spoke, I remember you saying you didn't have to recruit, you don't spend a lot of money on recruitment, but that people don't come to you for the money in general. You're cognizant that you're, although competitive, that you're not the highest paying employer, but people come back. So it proves for our listeners that think that people are leaving you for more money, people are coming back for less money. If the environment is healthy, if the environment is meeting those fundamental employee needs, which obviously, you know, we're a good 25 minutes into the conversation here. inGen Dynamics is clearly doing just that. And that in and of itself is enough to keep people coming back, right? So you did mention that you have an alumni network. Can you share with our listeners what that's about and how you engage your alumni network?
I think we have around 200 plus, 200 to 300 since inception. Like people have
That
come
have
in.
worked for you, moved on, and then
Absolutely.
just stayed
And
connected.
absolutely. And some of them have done great. And a lot of them, once you come back, and in fact, we are just interviewing one of our very early employees whose first job was with us. He worked in two companies and he wants to come back because he likes what you're doing and, you know, he likes some of the things you're doing. Some of them have gone on to become entrepreneurs. So we have spawned at least 10 entrepreneurs who are running their own companies. And again, you know, they like the thrill and what you're doing. And I think it's a very fulfilling thing for me as a leader that, you know, we are able to spawn this very powerful alumni network who kind of gives back to the society, to the workplace, to the culture. And I think it's a good feeling.
It
And
is
I
a
think
good
this,
feeling.
yeah, and absolutely. And I think it's what more companies should focus. I think your relationship with your ex-employees doesn't end when they leave your door.
No.
It doesn't. You know, they're kind of ambassadors for you as they go on, and they'll in fact help you recruit more people, you know, if they
Okay.
spread the word.
I
So
need to stop you there because that right there is gold. And it is something that when we do work with companies, so many companies fail to tend to that exit of employees and to understand the power of, for example, an exit interview or gathering, you know, some of the motivations behind the departure at that exit, but then also continuing to nurture, because you are 100% right that failure to do that exit right will lead to people becoming detractors rather than ambassadors, will lead to people not saying great things about your company, will make put ultimately will put your brand at risk. So we need to spend more time not only on, you know, the actual departure and that transition out and the information that we're gathering throughout that process and that journey, but also in nurturing that network of ex-employees who are very likely still powerful ambassadors when it comes to becoming a referral partner, when it comes to bringing in that next generation of worker within your organization. Also love that you are 100% okay with grooming future entrepreneurs that are not necessarily investing in the development and the growth of your team members, knowing wholeheartedly that they may not stay within your company, that they might very well go out on their own and do their own thing, but that you take comfort in the thought that that just means you're broadening the scope of impact of your company ultimately.
absolutely, absolutely. And I think that's an important thing, right? I think the time in which, I mean, at least with our parents or grandparents, people retired in the company they joined, right? So I think it's a fair expectation now that they're going to do their own thing. And if you give them that freedom, they'll be honest and upfront and they pick up the skill. And I think it's a transaction. And as long as, you know, a lot of people have stayed on for a very long time as well. So I think there's a mixed bag. And it's not a definite thing, right? We have at least six people who have rejoined us after a break. So people
Hmm.
come back. It's a kind of a taking a break and having a go around and coming back. So we welcome people back as well. So I think it's a good thing. You know,
I
if it
think this
works
is great.
out, good for us. If they come
I'm
back.
also curious. I mean, just this is just my organizational transformation brain at work. Sorry, I'm going to segue listeners for 2 seconds. Do you also engage that alumni to act as mentors for some of your existing employees as they're navigating different challenges? Like, it would be super interesting to engage them and connect them with some of your employees, maybe the newly hired, more junior employees, to give them access to kind of that objective. Sometimes I think mentorship is a non-negotiable, needs to happen in every organization internally, but it'd be really cool to have an external version as well, where they know that whatever information, expertise is being imparted is 100% objective, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So yeah, I mean, we have kind of experimented with this, and one of the things we have found that helps, and this is more to do with the soft skills and
Mm-hmm.
most less of a technical thing, right? I think a lot of unwritten rules in a company that makes a culture in an
Mm-hmm.
organization, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
unwritten stuff, and sometimes a pep talk of 30 minutes, not technical, with the alumni on what's okay and what's not okay, what works, what the
Yeah.
company is expecting, goes a long way, because
Mm.
the new employee would need 2 months of trial and error, which will also cost us
Oh, absolutely.
time and money. So this pep talk actually works great. They kind of
Huh.
know what works and what doesn't.
And you've
So that's
already experimented with that.
yes, yes.
I
So I
like
think
that.
yeah, and I think this is one of the things that I was telling about the employee we are currently interviewing to take on board again is that he already knows. I mean, he just told me that I know what you want. So there's that absolute understanding of culture, right, which is unwritten. And that only comes from alumni who's gone out,
Yeah,
seen
people
other
who
companies.
yeah, they've been here and don't know what you got till it's gone, right? They've been here, they've left, and
Absolutely.
now they want to come back. I love it. And it's interesting because when working with clients, we always recommend two types of kind of supported integration for a new employee. Your mentor who has the technical know-how and kind of that technical savvy, connecting them with a mentor, but then also connecting them with a buddy of sorts, or whatever term you want to use. And that buddy, see, in my mind, was internal. Their sole purpose is to impart those unspoken rules, is to talk about where do people typically take breaks, how do people roll, where can you grab a coffee nearby, what are some of the expectations, what, you know from a just team dynamics perspective, how leadership does things, that kind of stuff, that culture specific stuff. But I've always recommended internal buddies. Now you're blowing my mind with the potential of tapping that alumni network and also connecting them as an additional, as a supplement. But also, you're ultimately continuing to nurture that relationship, making that alumni who's already competent and understands all of the above in terms of culture. You're keeping them close enough so that they might decide, you know what, I think I want to come back. So it's win-win all around.
Absolutely. So that's the ulterior motive, right? Absolutely. So I
Absolutely.
think
Let's just pull it. Let's be completely transparent. Let's talk about what that's really
absolutely.
about. No, it's
Yeah.
great. Thank you, thank you, thank you. We are at our time, but I just want to reiterate for our audience those 5 pillars, which I'm going to liken to 5 ingredients of inGen Dynamics secret sauce that have effectively helped them create the work environment that leads to people wanting to apply and not having to spend a crazy amount of money and hours and resources on this eternal recruitment loop, but also makes people come back. So let's go really quickly. We've got a zero tolerance for corporate bloat, pillar number 1. Pillar number 2, and you're welcome to correct me if I miss any of these, being mission driven, product first mindset at all times. Number 3, zero tolerance for office politics. Number 4, move fast and take risks. We're okay with you taking risks. And number 5, being progressively optimistic. Was that correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. So those are the five
There you have
pillars.
it, folks. The 5 pillars, 5 secret ingredients to a secret sauce recipe which from what we've now understood was tried, tested, and true at inGen Dynamics. Thank you, Arshad, for taking the time out of your crazy busy schedule to meet with us. Before we sign off, if you had one last nugget of wisdom that you could impart on our listeners, to your fellow CEOs, fellow leaders, one thing they need to think of if they want to attract and keep the talent they need to succeed, what would that be?
I would say that culture eats strategy for breakfast.
Ha, I've heard that and I love it. Culture does eat strategy for breakfast. I adore it. I'll let you elaborate on that really quickly.
Sure, and I think what that means is that if you have the right culture, then probably whatever strategy is coming from top down, bottom in is already ingrained. If you don't have the right culture, it doesn't matter if you have a
It's going to go
fantastic
nowhere.
strategy. It's not going to percolate in your organization. It's not going to reach the right places. Your strategy is going to fail.
I 100% agree. Strategy is nothing if culture is not tended to, because you can spend a month straight strategizing. You can bring in all the biggest minds of the world to come up with your strategy. But if you've not created the culture to enable and empower your people to deliver on that strategy, then you're no further ahead. So there you have it, folks. Culture eats strategy for breakfast. I think that should become my new tagline. Thank you, Arshad, for joining us. It has been super insightful. If people want to continue connecting with you, how can they do that?
They can always have a look at a website, follow our social media where we are very active. Have a look at my blog. There is a founder's blog. A lot of videos on Vimeo. There's a lot of stuff out there. Please have a look.
Perfect.
And
And if they want to apply, sounds like your website's the place to do so
absolutely,
as well. Awesome.
absolutely.
Well, listeners, yet another installment in our Secret Sauce series. I hope you enjoyed it. At the end of the day, I hope that you sit with everything you've just heard. And if anything, you identify one single action that you can do today to start creating that highly enticing workplace culture. Well, folks, thanks for joining us for yet another enriching conversation. To hear more about today's guests, make sure to check out the links in the description of this episode. Want to continue the conversation? Then head on over to our social media platforms, all of which are also linked in the description, to keep it going. Finally, don't forget to subscribe to make sure you don't miss another valuable episode.